So, I think this nice lady mentioned Carrie Underwood before. Her son is in town doing some recording with somebody who worked with Carrie. This is where Carrie shot the video for Before He Cheats. If you remember that one with the baseball bat and her ex's car, her big #1 hit. Printer's Alley, they call it. I think a good location for a song about infidelity and revenge. Because Printer's Alley has a long checkered history.
I've been behind you all
Hey,
this time.
nice to see
and
you.
I come up and I tell them stuff that I know that you don't. Isn't this true? Have I done it before?
Yes, this is my co-host.
Co-host, been here 54 years. I've protected this and watched the rest. When I got here, L&C ball right there was the only thing here. Now, what do you want to know about Nashville? I can tell you.
All right.
I can tell you more than he can. All he got to do is put that stuff on me and pay me, but I do it for free.
All right. Everybody you see on the tour today, these are all actors that I've hired to sort of come in and provide comic relief. He's a nice guy. Anyway, Printer's Alley in the early 20th century was at the heart of what was called the Men's Quarter. It was our red light district. Now, you know, Nashville has a couple nicknames. You might know the big one is Music City, of course. An older nickname is Athens of the South, all about the colleges and the universities here. We have a replica of the Greek Parthenon up in our Centennial Park. A more recently acquired nickname, for better or for worse, is Nash Vegas. We have become the #1 destination for bachelorette and bachelor parties, ahead of Las Vegas. And on a Tuesday, you might not experience it quite as much as on a Friday or Saturday when there's just leagues and leagues of young gals in matching tank tops riding the pedal taverns down there just screaming and yelling. You know, people in Nashville are not that happy about this because, first of all, it's tying up traffic downtown. It's causing a lot of noise. The Airbnbs are being overrun by all these kids, causing problems. But I always think it's interesting, you know, everything is relative, especially when you start to look at history. So as much of a party city as we may seem like now, compared to 1905 or 1906, you know, if we'd been walking around downtown in 1905, from this alley down to the river, we would have encountered 165 saloons, 38 gambling parlors, and 17 bordellos. That's a lot of ice packed in a 1 square mile area. Strangely, in the middle of it all, right over here where this white parking garage is now, there were 2 Christian book publishers there. You know, the biggest industry in Nashville in the 20th century was not music, it was not banking, it was Christian book publishing. More Bibles were manufactured in Nashville than any other city. And the way this place got its nickname, the Printer's Alley, when all those guys who worked at the Christian book publishers, and there was a newspaper another block over, all the guys in the printing presses would come down here on their breaks, get a drink, and people in town started referring to it as, oh yeah, it's that Printer's Alley, the alley where the printers go. It was kind of a disparaging nickname, but it's stuck all these years later. Now, in addition to all of the kind of burlesque entertainment that's happened here over the many years, there's also been a lot of incredible music. So we talked a bit about recording with Chet and RCA. I want to talk about live music. And not only live music, but where all the after-hours deal-making and schmoozing used to go on. Once upon a time, right here, this was Nashville's hottest nightclub. It was called, coincidentally, Skull's Rainbow Room. So that sign on the door up above us, those just went up about a year ago. This place has been closed for 17 years. And I'm going to come back to the present in a moment. But let's journey back to 1948, when this place first opened. And we'll talk about the guy who opened it. His name is David Skull Shulman. Legendary figure in Nashville. Instrumental in the careers of almost every country star who came through town from the 50s up through the late 80s. So Marty Robbins, right on up through Tim McGraw. This guy's skull was a colorful character. First of all, he got this nickname because he was rail thin. He had these sort of dark, deep-set eyes, thin smile, almost looked like a skeleton. And I remember the moment I met him. It was 1990. I had just moved to town. I was wandering around down here, and I turned that corner, sort of froze in place because sitting in front of the door, next to this little pot of gold, was this older gentleman in what looked like a king's throne. He was dressed in bright red overalls. The overalls were imprinted head to toe with that laughing cartoon donkey from Hee Haw, the big bucktooth donkey, around his waist. He had what looked like a World Wrestling Federation belt. There was a buckle about this big, a silver skull. There must have been batteries inside because the eyes were flashing red. And then sitting next to him, very still, were these little tiny toy poodles. The one on the left was dyed hot pink. The one on the right was dyed purple. That was a lot to take in when I turned that corner. Not knowing who this guy was, I just thought, some sort of character. He waved me over and we started talking. I realized pretty quickly that Skull was one of these guys that had what I consider to be the gift of a golden ear. He loved all musicians and artists, but there were a handful over the years that he recognized as people who could really go on to something more, and he gave them their first gigs in this room. And I'm talking about Kenny Rogers, Roger Miller, Willie Nelson, even Dolly Parton, before she was well known, was playing on this little tiny stage in here. Further back, in the mid-1950s, Skull told me he had a comedian here on weekends, and this guy would play the guitar and sing funny songs about growing up in the South. His name was Andy Griffith. So Sheriff Andy Taylor on stage here. Not only country music, there's times where I wish I had a time machine. I would come back to certain days in Nashville history. June 7th, 1969 would be one of my first stops. It was the very first taping of the Johnny Cash television show, which happened at the Ryman. And as became Johnny's custom, after every show, he would always bring his guests to Printer's Alley and to the Rainbow Room to celebrate. His guests on the first show were Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, and Graham Nash. The four of them came in here, had drinks together, hopped on stage, and did a set. Too bad there weren't camera phones in 1969. So, guys, I'm going to give a little plug for something that I've got going on this week that I'm very excited about. I have a brand new book that's on Amazon and bookstores called Sgt. Pepper at 50. It's all about the 50th anniversary of the great Beatles album. I'm a huge Beatles fan. Live and breathe the Beatles. So I thought I would throw in a little Beatles bonus track today for y'all as it relates to Printer's Alley. And I'll start this by saying that Paul McCartney lived in Nashville in 1974. When I found that out, when I first came to Nashville, I couldn't believe it. So, 1974, this is after the Beatles, of course. He and his wife Linda have this band called Wings, which you guys remember. They came to town to rehearse for a tour that they were going to be doing that fall. This is June 1974, and that really they thought they would only stay for a week or two. But Paul ended up falling in love with the city, and after 3 or 4 days said, let's hang out here for the summer. Rented a farm, moved his family in there, moved his band in there, and ended up living here for 3 months. Now you think about, even then, Paul was pretty much the most recognized pop star on earth. Being in Nashville, though, he was kind of able to just go about his business, I know folks that lived here back then, they say, yeah, you would see him chowing down for breakfast out at the Loveless Cafe a couple mornings a week, shopping in Hillsborough Village, taking his kids to the drive-in movies. And so one evening, Paul and Linda come down here to check out the nightlife, and they walk into the Rainbow Room. And a very famous story that ends up resulting in a Paul McCartney song. So on stage the night that Paul came in, there was a young singer. Her name was Diane Gaffney. She was, at the time, a sort of up-and-coming country singer. And Paul was in the audience listening to Diane and thought she was great, having some drinks. And at some point, inspiration struck. He grabbed a little cocktail napkin and started scratching down some song lyrics. He got up the next morning, and Paul wrote a song about this girl. He called the song Diane G, Diane Gaffney. He kept playing it over and over the next few days around the house. He's putting the finishing touches on it. At the last minute, he changed the title of the song from Diane G to Sally G. He said it sang better. And I'll send you guys a link to this song. I think it's true. Sally does sing better than Diane, but when I think about it, I also think Linda was probably just fed up with hearing about this other woman over and over around the house, insisted he change it. So Sally G was recorded in Nashville. In fact, Chet Atkins played on that record. It was a number 17 hit for McCartney and Wings, obviously not even one of his best-known songs. But it was only a B-side, talking about vinyl again. The A-side of this record was a huge number 1 written and recorded in Nashville. It was called Junior's Farm. 3 weeks at number 1 for McCartney. And Junior's Farm was written about the guy who was the McCartney's landlord, Curly Putman Jr. Now, You may not recognize that name, but this was one of our greatest songwriters. He passed away recently at age 87, but Curly wrote D-I-V-O-R-C-E for Tammy Wynette. He wrote Green Green Grass of Home for Porter Wagner. Also wrote what I consider to be maybe the greatest country ballad of all times, He Stopped Loving Her Today, for a postcard. Anybody tell me who sang that? I'll give you a hint. He had two nicknames. One was the Possum, the other was No Show. Initials GJ.
George Jones.
Right on. Keep giving me clues, I knew you'd get it. So George Jones, He Stopped Loving Her Today. I'm guessing maybe you guys have never heard that song, so this is definitely something I'll put in the email later. You know, one of the things about country music to me that I'm missing a little bit with the modern stuff is the older stuff really embraced the dark and the light, the sad and the happy. I mean, it was a much broader spectrum of emotional stuff. And this song, as the title suggests, it's a very sad song about a guy who was hung up on a woman till the day they put him in the casket and put him in the ground. I mean, there's no light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So, you know, I think a lot of country music, you guys may have seen, there's a great show on public television right now called American Epic. I don't know if anybody has seen this. Robert Redford is narrating and Jack White produced, and it's tracing the roots of American music, and a lot of country music comes out of folk music that was brought over by the British and the Irish and the Scottish. Those folk songs, not only about storytelling, but also about very real dark subjects, you know, adultery, alcoholism, even murder. So, again, the broader definition of country music is what I'm really interested in on this tour, and a lot of the music that I'll send you later embraces that, you know. Yes?
I think that's why Chris Stapleton is so popular
Right on.
Is it because it's coming to the back of those roots? Like his new song is, you know, I'll love you either way, or something like
Yeah.
that. Kind of reminds me of the song you just
It's a
sang.
great observation, you know, and I think there's a progression that happens. One of the things that started with that Nashville sound is a progression of taking the music too far pop. So by the early 70s, the Nashville sound was played out a little bit. In comes the outlaw movement with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Tom Paul Glaser, who want the music to be a little rougher, more rock and roll. That played out for 5 or 6 years. In comes the urban cowboy movement, adding a disco beat, making it all slick again. That plays out. In come the new traditionalists like George Strait, Dwight Yoakam. So this push and pull has been in place really since Chet's time. And I think right now, the last couple of years, we've been at this place where, you know, with Luke Bryan and Jason Aldean and Florida Georgia Line, it's pretty pop, let's face it. I mean, the only thing that's country sometimes is a hat and a little bit of pedal steel, you know, or talking about small town Saturday night. So you're right, Chris Stapleton, I think is pointing the way forward because there's a lot of younger artists here in town. You guys might not know yet, but I guarantee in a year or two, you'll know people like Jason Isbell, Margot Price, Caitlin Rose, all these kids that are kind of throwing it back, you know.
And Chris Stapleton's my son, my 19-year-old's favorite country artist.
There you go.
Just shows
That's
how
indicative
coming
of how it's really.
Right.
So yeah, everything is cyclical in the arts. It tends to be, you know. So guys, a bit about the past. We're going to go inside for a minute. I want to show you the renovations that have been going on here. Also tell you that our friend Skull was murdered here in 1998. And after his death, the bar was closed down. And for years, people believed that there was a ghost that hung around this front door that would sometimes be in this building. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But let's go inside. Have a look around.